Rockstar has been one of the best game studios for the past 20 years. They have developed and published some of the most well-known and influential games, like Manhunt, Max Payne, and who could forget, table tennis. Of course, their real claim to fame is Grand Theft Auto, and the last entry, GTA 5, is still topping the game charts after 5 years on the market. Now, Rockstar has returned to the Old West, with Red Dead Redemption 2, the prequel to their 2010 hit. In layman's terms, these games are kind of like Grand Theft Auto in a Western setting, but they are also much more than that. While they serve as dedications to old Western films, they take place during a time where the Wild West was slowly becoming less wild. The law was taking over, technology was booming, and banks were on the cusp of owning everybody. It's a period rarely touched upon in cinema, and both Red Dead Redemption games tell unique stories because of it. In the first title, former gang member John Marston is forced by the government to track down his old members in order to get his newer and more honorable life back on track. 2, on the other hand, is set during John's time as a member of the Vanderlinde gang. But now, the story of how the gang collapsed are told through the eyes of a new protagonist, Arthur Morgan. We will go more in-depth on the story later in this episode. But now, we have to ask if Red Dead Redemption 2 is a true successor to the first game. Was it worth the 8-year-long wait? Or does it pull a Grand Theft Auto 4 and not quite live up to the standards set by its predecessor? We will find out with the following categories: world, controls, gameplay, and story, with only minor spoilers for both games. Even though you've had 8 years to catch up on Red Dead 1, we'll spare you in case you've played 2, but not 1, since it's now worth playing even more if you've completed the story in 2. Now then, let's saddle up, because the battle between Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 is about to break out. Now obviously, we're not going to pit the graphics of these games against each other because, well, come on. And to be fair, comparing Red Dead Redemption 2's graphics to any other game would be a David and Goliath scenario, because it's probably the best looking game of this generation, and all time. Instead, we're going to compare the richness and detail of the worlds that both of these games offer. What's interesting is that the New Austin district of the first game's map is included in Red Dead Redemption 2's already massive map. But while we're on the subject of New Austin, let's talk about the open world of Red Dead Redemption 1. Even though the game is set in 1911, New Austin still feels like an old western backdrop, thanks largely to the vast deserts and small towns that haven't quite caught up with technology as of yet. New Austin isn't all just desert though, as some areas have trees, snow, as well as lakes. Later on, you will also visit Mexico, which is also a desert like New Austin, but with different architecture. Safe to say, Red Dead 1 doesn't have that much variety in terms of its terrain, because you'll be spending most of your time in the desert and canyon settings. This is largely due to the limited power of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, but it's also appropriate seeing as it's a Western. Now, having been released a whopping 8 years after Red Dead 1 and on more powerful consoles, it's no surprise that Red Dead 2 has a better looking and bigger world. Until you get to New Austin, you'll be hard-pressed to find any deserts in the states of West Elizabeth, Amberino, New Hanover, and Lemoyne. Instead, you will find rich grasslands, gorgeous mountains, haunting swamps, and rich, bustling cities like Saint Denis. Whereas Red Dead 1 had some settings like that, they didn't hold a candle to the variety found in Red Dead 2's. But what kind of worlds would these be without the life? Not just the human life, but the wildlife. Both games have an abundance of animals to hunt in exchange for some money and food. Tread carefully though, because some of them will be in the mood to pick a fight. Of course, Red Dead 2 has more animals and a greater focus on hunting. You see, unlike the first game, the world will drastically affect the protagonist if you're not properly equipped. This means dressing up for hot or cold weather and maintaining a healthy weight by eating and drinking. Not doing these things properly will affect how fast your health drains or regenerates, and how much stamina you have. The same goes for your horse, which you will have to clean and feed regularly. So yeah, the winner of this battle is obvious. It's one thing to have a bigger and better looking world after 8 years of progress in game design, but it's another thing entirely to have this world affect your playing if not properly equipped. Rockstar did not have to do this at all with Red Dead Redemption 2, but they did. And it is because they aimed to make this game as realistic as possible, and it definitely worked in this battle for the game world. Oh boy, here we go. We just said at the end of this last battle that Rockstar aimed to deliver realism in Red Dead Redemption 2, which worked in its favor when designing the open world. I stand by what I said about Rockstar being one of the best game developers of the age, but they would be even better if they just made their games not have frustrating controls. Red Dead Redemption 1 definitely has these moments of frustration. Moving around can be a chore, especially when you have to keep tapping a button to run. This was more forgivable back in 2010, but in 2018? Why? But at least aiming your gun in Red Dead 2 is easier than it was in 1, where it was literally impossible to hit anybody without using auto-aim. Granted, I still did that at times in 2, but it felt much less stiff than it did in 1. Also, there is a first-person mode, but I barely used it because this game is clearly designed for third-person control. Make no mistake, the awkward controls of these games were very much designed intentionally, especially in 2. As stated before, Red Dead 2 has the goal of being as realistic of a game as any game would allow. It's a great idea in theory, but a recipe for frustration in execution. This is especially the case on that damn horse. I'm not going to lie and act like Red Dead 1 didn't have frustrating horse moments, but in 2, they are made all the more worse by those infuriating trees.
Real horses don't run into trees very often.
Sure, Red Dead Redemption 1 had some janky controls as well, but upon playing it recently in anticipation for 2, I didn't notice them as much as in the new game. Maybe because Red Dead 1 came out 8 years ago, and it would be safe to expect the game's controls to improve within that time frame, not get worse. Even though the controls in Red Dead Redemption 2 aren't a deal breaker, they certainly are nothing to praise. With that in mind, Red Dead Redemption 1 wins the battle for controls simply by not being as rage-inducing. Controls are one thing, but if the gameplay is good enough, then it's much easier to tolerate some lackluster controls. Most open-world games nowadays include a main quest as well as a ton of side quests that may distract you. Rockstar's open-world games seem to have a healthy focus on both, and I personally have felt more encouraged to play the main quests more so than the side ones. The same goes for Red Dead 1 and 2. Not to say these side quests, or in this case, stranger missions, aren't good. They are. You encounter most of these stranger missions just by exploring the game's world, but they're not random encounters like the literal random encounters. In both games, NPCs will run into you asking for help, requesting that you bring back their stolen horse or challenge you to a standoff. In Red Dead 2, however, they take these encounters up a notch. Sometimes you will be ambushed by rival gangs and other outlaws that will try and rob you, and you will still be helping citizens along the way if you want, by bringing them back to their homes after their horse died, or helping them recover from a rattlesnake bite. And if you just want to kick back and have some fun, you can play some Five Finger Filet, watch a movie, a stage show, or play some dominoes to pass the time and gain some money through bets. As you can tell, both games have these side activities and utilize them well. But where I find 2 to be the most different is in its bounty system. You see, in Red Dead 1, John is on a quest to become a better man, which is why it doesn't really make much sense for him to do bad things in that game. Arthur, on the other hand, despite his good heart, is still an outlaw, and I found it to be much easier to be a criminal. Sure, you can still hunt criminals through bounty hunting like in the first game, but it's also fun to be the criminal. Robbing citizens is an easy way to get some cash quickly, and you don't have to just stop at stores and wagons. More freedom of choice already gives Red Dead Redemption 2 the upper hand in this battle, but another big feature is the camp. Your gang will set up an outpost where you can contribute money and other goods to improve it, but after I finally upgraded my camp, I mainly just filled up my wallet in the thousands range. As you can tell, we talked a lot about Red Dead Redemption 2 in this category, more than one, because it does everything gameplay-wise that Red Dead 1 did, but better, except for the controls, and with more options. Simply put, Red Dead Redemption 2 improves upon the gameplay established in 1, which is to be expected after 8 years of progress, which is why it wins the battle for gameplay. Here is where the fight gets interesting. Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 are both fantastic examples of storytelling in video games. The acting is superb, the writing captivating, and the settings immersive. However, what they also have in common is that their beginnings are super slow. In Red Dead 1, you spend about the first hour at the McFarland Ranch, leading cattle, taming horses, and shooting some rabbits. It's a chore to get through, and literally, they are chores you would expect to do at a ranch. In Red Dead 2, you spend the first 2 hours at the Snowy Peaks. It's not all boring, however. You'll engage in some fights with the O'Driscoll gang and hunt for some deer. After you descend from the mountains, you are free to explore the world. So regardless of how slow the beginnings of these games are, at least they served a purpose. They are obviously tutorials, but they also offer exposition to catch the player up on what's going on. But with those beginnings out of the way, it's time to really decide which one of these games has the better story. And believe me, I was very conflicted when deciding the winner of this battle. You see, Red Dead Redemption 1 is a special game, as far as story is concerned. Many fans, including myself, have a connection with John Marston as a protagonist, as well as his quest for redemption. That said, upon further examination, there are also some flaws in this story. For one, most of the characters come off as a little too cartoonish and stereotypical. There's nothing wrong with stereotypes, but they can overstay their welcome. What's that? You have an Irish character named Irish? Give me a break. Need a signature crazy person? That's where Seth comes in. And how about that quirky Nigel West Dickens? That jerk still owes me $5. Thankfully, there are still plenty of normal characters in that game, but the ones in Red Dead 2 feel way more believable and less like one-dimensional stereotypes. Sure, there is still this Scottish guy, but whatever. It also helps that most of these people stick around way longer than just a few missions. They have so much more time to become fully fleshed out. Then there is another problem with Red Dead 1, being that most of the quests make John out to be some kind of an errand boy. Not to say there aren't missions like that in Red Dead 2, but Arthur's involvement in the story flows way more naturally than just people asking Arthur to do favors for them. The only real problem I had with Red Dead 2's story was how it ended. No spoilers here, but I feel like it lacked the oomph of the first game's ending, and that could have been due to the 2-part epilogue that lasted around 4 hours. That said, I'm probably in the minority when it comes to that feeling, which is totally okay. Red Dead 2 has an incredible story, and it is undoubtedly Rockstar's most cinematic game yet. In the end, both Red Dead 1 and 2 have amazing stories, but 2 knew how to tell its story better, without an abundance of stereotypical characters and a main quest line that made Arthur out to be less of an errand boy than John.
Looks like I turned into the goddamn errand boy.
And with that, we have to give the victory to Red Dead Redemption 2. So now it's settled. With Red Dead Redemption 1 winning the battle for controls and 2 winning the ones for world, gameplay, and story, it's no surprise that Rockstar Games took all the lessons they've learned from 1 and even GTA 5 and created one of the best games of the year and console generation. That said, would it really be that tough for you guys to learn how to make proper controls? Still, it'll take a lot more than clunky controls to make this game any less great than it already is. Which is why we have to give it a score of 95 out of 100. Anyway, we'd like to hear from you. Do you think Red Dead Redemption 2 is a better game than the first one? Explain why you agree or disagree in the comment section below, or tweet it to us at Common Realm. In the meantime, be sure to click that thumbs up if you liked this video, and if you are new, subscribe and hit that notification bell to know when we upload another episode of Game vs. Game, as well as more content regarding the Nintendo Switch and other game franchises. We'd also like to thank our glorious patrons, including royal producer Kenyatta Ali, for all their contributions to the realm. Be sure to visit patreon.com/commonrealm if you'd like to join the ranks in exchange for some awesome perks and swag. That's all for now, girls and guys, so we will see you next time on the Commonwealth Realm.